set up for this lesson, first I just put a roll of adding tape down on the floor, making sure to tape it down at specific points, so in case it rips, the entire thing doesn't come up. On the wall, I set up these group stations. So there's a start one, and there's group A, B, C, D, and E. So everyone knows where to go for each station. Right on the floor by each group, I put a ruler or some tape and 2 colored pencils to mark the 2 different types of motion. So I used a blue and a non-blue because that was what we had available. And a calculator will be here shortly as well. Just for space-wise, I put the groups on opposite sides, so Group A was on that wall, Group B there, and then C, D, and E. So when the groups are all lined up, they're not all on the same side of the hallway, all crowding into each other. Each group label on the floor, I put 2 calculators for you to use later, a measuring tape for when we get into that, and 2 colored pencils, a blue and a non-blue. That's just the resources we have available. So when you read over this, I hope you were seeing about how we're going to be doing 2 different types of motion. The first type of motion we're going to be doing is steady motion, or anybody? Uniform motion, thank you. Now, this is a great time for you to talk to your kids about variables and controls. What do we need to make sure we control within this experiment? The variable is the pace that I'm walking, or the teacher is walking. So what else do we need to make sure that we stay constant throughout? Time, as far as? Telling me when to drop, right. So the suggestion you saw in the guide was how we're going to count here. About drop Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop, etc. So we're all going to do that. Obviously with your kids you can practice that. I don't see a need for us to all practice counting. What other controls do we need to make sure we put in place?
Total distance traveled for each trial.
Total distance traveled for each trial is something that we can try to keep the same, but obviously with human error, it's a good point to talk to your kids about human error about. And obviously I'm going to try to walk steady, but again, human error. Another variable that we need to make sure we do is what side of the beanbag are we going to measure? Because if the beanbag drops here, if this group marks the side of the beanbag that's closest to that side, and this group marks the side of the beanbag that's closest to that side, those are obviously 2 different things. So which side would you all like to measure? The mark, the side that's closest to start, or the side that's closest to finish? Finish. Let's take a quick vote. Who'd like to mark the side that's closest to the start? And closest to the finish? Seemed like to the start had more people. So as the beanbag drops, you're going to mark whichever side of it, when it hits, is closest to the starting point. Now for the first type of motion, you're all going to use the blue colored pencil, because we're going to be using the same piece of tape for all the trials. And we're going to do it 3 times before we measure any of them. So you're going to, when we do the first trial down with your blue pencil, you're going to mark it and label it T1. Then I'm going to pick all the beanbags up, we're going to start it again, and we're going to mark it again and label the second one T2. So this way when you measure, you're making sure to measure from your T1 to the previous group's T1. You always measure from yours to the previous group. So Group A will measure from the second bag back to the beginning. Group B will measure from the 3rd bag to Group's A bag, etc. down the line. We're going to mark the front of the bag and the front of the bag here. So after the beanbags are up, you're marking from the mark on the piece of tape. From T1 to T1. From T2 to T2. Any other questions?
I'm confused about what each group is doing.
Okay,
Each group is doing one at a one?
When we drop them all, you're marking your bag. No one's marking the one at the start. Group A is marking the second one. Group B is marking the 3rd one. Group C the 4th one. Group D the 5th one. Group E the last one. Then I'm going to pick them all up. We're going to mark them again. Pick them all up. Mark them again for the 3rd trial. And then we're going to measure from your T1 to the previous group's T1. Your T2 to the previous group's T2. And then T3 to T3, add the 3 up, average them out. Any other questions? Okay, fantastic. Well then, I am going to start whenever everyone else starts counting. We're going to do this one you saw in the guide. The drop Mississippi, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So whenever you all start counting is when I will begin.
Drop Mississippi, 1, Mississippi.
Okay, we're going to have to start that over, okay? Maybe we should have practiced counting. Okay, so let's all just practice that really quick first. We're all going to go drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop. And exactly. Okay. So whenever you all begin, I will go.
Drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi drop, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2,